So this is going to be the first of a series of videos dedicated to exploring the functions of the Force. I'm gonna break these down into smaller aspects and build up bigger, larger portions of the Force. Just because stop this video being about 2 hours long, because there's a lot to cover. So in this video we're going to be looking specifically at corruption, dark side corruption. And to do that, firstly we have to look at the living and cosmic force. Now I am going to do a separate video entirely based on the living and cosmic force, and then videos based on those individually too, because there is a lot to cover when it comes to that. We're not going to go into too much detail on that sort of stuff. We're just going to be looking at the nature of the dark side, which is important to understand the many functions that I'm going to make in future videos. So think of this like a groundwork for future videos to come. Now, to understand how the dark side functions, you're going to have to look at the difference between living and cosmic force. You'll notice that the dark side is always there, right? The dark side is always within you, it's always there. And that's the message in the Yoda arc, right? The dark side's always here, but do not give it power over you. That's the message in the Yoda arc. It's always there, but it doesn't have power over me.
Recognize you. I do. Part of me you are. Yes. But power over me, you have not. Control over me, you have not. My dark side, you are. Reject you, I do.
And that's what causes an imbalance, right? Because the dark side's always there, but there's not always an imbalance. You know, you have to use the dark side to cause an imbalance. It's not the dark side being there, it's the use of the dark side. And obviously, using the dark side gives it power over you. And so the dark side is inherently within us, right? It's within us, it lives in our hearts. However deep within it might be buried, or however close to the surface it might be, it's within us. And that there is your cosmic force connection within. And that line in Revenge of the Sith think inward, only about themselves. And that's selfish, right? The opposite of the Jedi who think outward with the living force, and they're selfless.
The Sith rely on their passion for their strength. They think inwards, only about themselves.
And the Jedi don't.
The Jedi are selfless. They only care about others.
And of course, selflessness has to do with others, right? It's to do with around you. Whereas selfishness is all to do with you, it's all to do with within you. Which is the two key differences we see in both Yoda and Dooku's training.
Its energy surrounds us and binds us. You must feel the force around you.
You must strengthen your connection with the Force, my apprentice. Feel its power within you.
So the Jedi are all about around, living force, selfless, and the Sith are all about within, the self and selfish.
My nature is to do what is selfless, but my brothers will always be to do what is selfish.
And that's the cosmic force. That's the dark side. So think of the cosmic force like a big mass of energy, half it's dark, half it's light. And think of the living force like one big tapestry that connects everyone. And of course it's those outwards emotions that are living force based, emotions that bond you to someone, emotions that create force bonds. Because that's what the living force is. At the end of the day, it's a web, it's a bond, it's one big tapestry. So just essentially picture, just to visualize it, to a big mass of energy above, and then you've got this web of power below, which is the web power created by living things. As I say, I'll get more into the mechanics of living and cosmic force in a separate video. This is just really going to be about the nature of the dark side and corruption. So you've got this diagram, right? You've got the massive energy and you've got this web. Now, what is the goal there to create an imbalance? It's to infect this web, corrupt this web with dark side from the cosmic force. And that's what happens when you use the dark side, right? Because it exists within all of us. So when you dig within and you let that out, that's what you're letting out into that web of living force power. And the more you do that, the more your living force presence gets corrupted. So the more of it starts to become corrupted living force, which is the dark side version of living force. It is the opposite of living force. So I like to call it dying force, just to specify that it is corrupted living force that you're talking about here and not another area of the dark side. So we'll call this dying force, which, that's a good way to think of it. That's essentially what it is, dying force. So the dark side is not inherently living force based, it is cosmic force based, and it is corruption of the living force. Jedi Path talks about how the dark side acts as a living force cancer, which is almost pretty much exactly what Lucas says in Power of Myth, mythology, with Joseph Campbell. He says it's like a huge cancer, alive, festering, it's always there. And then in Of Man and Myth, George Lucas also says that it is the antithesis of a symbiotic relationship in which you become a cancer and you eventually kill the host and everything dies. So by becoming corrupted, you fall out of that symbiotic circle, that symbiotic relationship, which is the circle of life, basically. And they say in Clone Wars, right, the cosmic force is renewed by the living force.
Living beings generate the living force, which in turn powers the wellspring that is the cosmic force.
When a living thing dies, all is renewed. Life passes from the living force into the cosmic force and becomes one with it. One powers the other. One is renewed by the other.
So when you become corrupted, your living force presence becomes dying force, which is literally the opposite, it's death. So there's nothing there to renew the cosmic force. So that symbiosis is broken when people go to the dark side and cause imbalances. And all that dark side energy goes to chaos. I will do a video on that in depth, explaining all the functions of chaos and how that works. But yeah, it goes to chaos rather than going back into the cosmic force and back into that symbiosis. And then obviously ultimately that builds up and leads to an imbalance on an even bigger scale and so on and so forth. So there's loads going into it. I'm going to make loads of videos about it. So, but once you're corrupted, right, you start to, once your own force, living force presence is corrupted and becomes dying force, that's when you start to channel the dark side outwardly. So emotions like anger, like aggression, all traits of the dark side, and they're no longer internal, they're external, they're to someone else. So think like jealousy, for example. That's a inherently internal emotion. That's something that's going on within, and obviously that is something of the dark side. That's something you shouldn't give power to. You shouldn't give it power over you, because obviously jealousy leads to bigger things. Leads to anger, which isn't internal. That's external. You know, you take your anger out on someone, fury. You take it out, and that becomes part of the living force. Then that corrupts, and so you know the whole thing is you just shouldn't go down that whole spiral. And that is, yeah, because of corruption. It's the whole thing with the dark side. And the whole...
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Attachment leads to jealousy. The shadow of greed, that is
just the different stages of corruption. Those internal selfish emotions begin to affect others. So all those threads being corrupt, all those threads around you that are connected to you, they're connected from you, they're gonna corrupt as well. So it's like you're falling into a bad habit or getting addicted to drugs, like an addiction, or yeah, like a parasite eats away and eventually kills the host.
You'll never be satiated. You're always going to be consumed with this driving desire to have more stuff and be afraid that others are going to take it away from you.
And of course, depending on how powerful someone is, depends on how many threads they make up, depends on how many threads they're going to influence. So the stronger the person is who's corrupted, the bigger the imbalance is going to be, or the more that person spreads the corruption, the bigger the imbalance is going to be. But of course the force is a shared power, right? So the stronger you are, the more you are spreading that imbalance by corrupting yourself, if that makes sense. Because it's a power that's connected to everyone else, and it's the connections you share that depend on how powerful one is. Yeah, but that is corruption. That's what corruption of the living force is. That is what causes imbalances. I'm going to do another video on imbalances, going more in depth into them as well. But yeah, if you're interested in all that sort of stuff, deep mechanics, concepts ingrained in Star Wars, then stick around.